I'm Wes Dening, and this is Win the Day with James Whittaker.
You're listening to Win the Day with James Whittaker.
What we do in life echoes in eternity.
Broadcasting from Los Angeles, California. Here's your host, James Whittaker.
Let's go.
Hey winners, welcome back to Win the Day, where we sit down with some of the world's true change makers to give you all the tips, tools, and strategies to win the day every day. The quote for this episode comes from French poet Victor Hugo and says, "Nothing is more powerful than an idea whose time has come." Joining us in the studio is a good friend of mine and a legend in the entertainment world, Wes Dening. Wes grew up in Brisbane, Australia, before a stint in the Big Brother house gave him a taste of television. Today, he's an award-winning entrepreneur, producer, and content creator. Wes has developed, sold, and produced critically acclaimed content for an array of media platforms and grown content businesses all around the world. As founder of production company WDE, Wes has developed programs that are broadcast in more than 50 countries, including Big Crazy Family Adventure, The Stafford Brothers, and The Flying Winemaker. In 2016, he joined Eureka Productions, where he has since executive produced shows like Dating Around on Netflix, Finding Magic Mike on HBO Max, and Crikey, It's the Irwins on the Animal Planet. Wes also produced the miniature golf show Holy Moly alongside three-time NBA champ Steph Curry, which debuted as one of the most watched new series premieres on US television. In this episode, we talk about the three attributes that underpin Wes's success, how to prepare for a successful pitch in your business, the most thrilling moments from his television career, and how a kid from Australia made it to the helm of TV production in the US. Before we begin, remember that the right bit of inspiration can completely change the trajectory of someone's life. So if there's a friend or loved one out there who needs to hear this episode or could use some help to win the day, share it with them right now. And if you want access to episodes like this one as soon as they're released, make sure you hit that follow or the subscribe button. All right, let's win the day with my good mate, Wes Dening. Wes, great to see you, buddy. How are you?
James, great to be here. Thank you for that introduction. It was really, really sweet and really well thought out.
You'll need to update your corporate bio now to include the Win the Day podcast.
Absolutely. And I like how you said produced Holy Moly. We're still producing Holy Moly. That show's going to go on forever.
Present tense.
Exactly.
Yeah, the sign of a good TV show, one that goes on forever.
Exactly. Mate, it's great to be here, and it was really nice of you to pull out some of those credits. And I love the shows that I make. I really do. Yeah. And I'm very passionate about them. So it's nice sometimes just to sit back and listen to the ones that, you know, we've spilt blood over and the ones that we love, and some are tougher than others. But it's nice to just to take a moment and you know, enjoy some of those titles, because there's a lot of memories there, that's for sure.
A lot of things go on behind the scenes for 22 minutes or whatever it is of finished footage.
It's so true. I mean, even last year, you know, being a year dealing with COVID, like, it just makes television production harder. Like, you know, we had one shows are fun to make. Generally, like, television's great fun. And with COVID, like, one show, we spent 2 months in a hotel in a bubble making a show about male strippers in Las Vegas in the middle of summer during Delta. And it was actually really hard. But the product is great. So, TV, we do have a lot of fun with what we do.
It's hard, you know, you have such an exciting, dynamic life, but you've also got a wife and 3 kids. It's tough to be on set and on location all around the world for months and months at a time. It's a tough thing you deal with.
Yeah, definitely. And I find I have that balance where I try and keep my weekends sacred. And there are times during the week where I'll disconnect from work to do something with the family. But the reason I do that is because then the next thing I know, I might be away for 2 months or 3 months. You know, in about 2 weeks' time, I'm off, you know, in the Mediterranean for 4 weeks for a shoot. And, there'll be another time where I have to go away for 6 weeks. I've done stints of 6 weeks in Antarctica, Big Crazy Family Adventure, 96 days on the road, nonstop. You know, Finding Magic Mike, 2 months in a hotel in Las Vegas. So some shows you come and go. Some shows are based here in LA. But a lot of shows, you know, you're required to go away for a period of time.
And speaking of iconic TV shows, you had Big Brother back in the day was your first foray into the television world. Yeah. Take us into that moment. How thrilling was that at the time?
It was exciting. Like, I was living in London when I was 18, and when I came back to Australia, it was my mum's idea. She said, "Oh, they're auditioning for Big Brother. You should put in a tape." I was like, "Oh, okay, I'll do it. What the hell? Why not?" And I hadn't really watched the show, but I knew how huge it had been in the UK. And in the back of my mind, I thought, oh, this could be a great way to get some entry point into television. And I did a tape, and at the time I think they had like 14,000 people apply, and it's funny, and you know, did the finals, and then got in the show, and it was great. And I mean, I can look back now. It's been 20 years, well, not 20 years. It's been 18 years since I did that, and I was 20 at the time. And it's almost at that stage now where like it's a great sort of nostalgic sort of throwback, but it still carries, you know, wherever you go to some extent. So
People still remember you as well.
They
Like,
do, yeah. It's really sweet. In
Yeah.
fact, I just had a call from my mum recently who was telling me about, she was telling a story about me, and everyone's like, they remembered me from Big Brother, which is really sweet. It's amazing how at that point in time, like reality and television in particular in Australia in 2004 was such a touch point for a lot of people. And I have fond memories. It's one of those things, like I remember the house and the experience being very boring, but I actually didn't understand how television was being made or it was made then at all. I didn't have a clue. Different story now for sure.
A lot of people want to get that career in entertainment, but they're a loss as to how to even start. How did you get a foot in the door in the TV world that led to all the things that you've been able to do?
Yeah. So the truth is, after Big Brother, it was a huge profile or platform, I should say. And there was a show on Australian TV called Totally Wild, and it had been on forever as a legacy program. And it was on 48 weeks of the year, 4 afternoons a week. And they actually produced it out of Brisbane, which is where my hometown is. And after Big Brother, I was fortunate enough to meet the executive producer of the show was a guy called Jeff Cooper. And I met him at an event or a function. And he probably shouldn't have done it, but he gave me his number or his card, one of the two. And I just started calling him up. And I was like, Jeff, I want to work on Totally Wild. You know, would you consider having me on to do a couple of episodes? And he was very polite. And then I kept calling him and he stopped taking my calls. And as soon as his assistant would take the calls, hey, Wes, nice to hear from you. And I probably called 3 or 4 times. Her name was Kate, and she's amazing. She's still a friend. And then eventually the call came back and they said, hey, we're willing to have you come in for 2 months. It's going to be unpaid and we'll have you on 2 days a week. I said, done. I'm in, like no problem at all. And I actually started coming in 5 days a week. I just came into the office every day. And if I wasn't working on a story, I'd write scripts, I'd pitch my boss, I'd try and help out. I just wanted to be part of the environment and to learn. And after 2 months, I was offered a 6-month talent contract on camera. And then after that 6 months, it became like a producing contract. And so when I was at Network 10 in Australia as a 21-year-old, I was there for 5 years. I was very, very fortunate because it's where I learned how to make TV. So every day I'd be making stories for Totally Wild, writing scripts, going in the field and shooting them with one camera, coming back to an offline machine where I'd do a paper edit, going in with the editor to make the 3 or 4 minute segment that would go into the show every night or every afternoon. And in that time, I got to do, Totally Wild, which was a travel adventure show. I got to do live news. I got to do New Year's Eve live telecasts. I got to do sports programming at 10. I got to do 3 different documentaries at 10. And then I developed and produced a series on life in Antarctica and spent 6 weeks living in Antarctica. And that series did extremely well. So I'm so grateful that, I didn't make a lot of money in that time, but that's where I learned how to make TV. So it was those early years of just grit and persistence and belief.
So many good lessons there. Even in terms of giving, a lot of people, I feel like they are focused on what can I get from this company that I want to get. And they feel like they owe them something, but you were willing to leave ego and all that stuff aside just to say, what can I do to serve you with what they're doing?
Yeah. And look, everyone has a bit of an ego. I've got a bit of an ego. We all do to some extent. So I was on camera at the time. And of course I loved the fact that I was still doing work on camera. I was willing to learn. Like I had to learn the business of TV. And sorry, not the business, how to make TV. And I remember, some fond memories are being in the middle of small town Australia. And after shooting all day, cameras similar to the ones that we're using today. Oh, actually, no, they were much bigger. But, after shooting all day, we'd sit in a motel room, crack a beer, and myself and our cameraman, who was in his 50s or 40s, like really great operators, we'd plug the camera into the TV and we'd just sit there and watch everything we shot for the day and sort of like, oh, does this work? How can we do it better tomorrow? So like it really was sort of mooching off these pros in the industry and learning how to produce.
What was it about production that you liked more than sort of being the host of a show?
It's a good question. When you are the host, like you very much are at the mercy of someone else, like if you, think you might be the perfect person for a program for whatever reason, it's ultimately not your decision. They might want a female or they might want someone that's got a certain accent. And there's certain things about yourself or myself, obviously we can't change. So what I love about production is that I get to create the narrative. I get to create the story and I get to bring it to life. And that was a big part of, why I got into, after Channel 10, I wanted to be creating shows. I wanted to be selling shows. And I wanted to be making them. And making them is really tough. Like it's extremely hard. But what I learned from Channel 10 was that series on life in Antarctica, they distributed to, say, 20 odd countries around the world. And I was like, oh, great. When do I get, when's my paycheck come through for that? And they're like, well, what do you mean? Like, you're in-house talent. And it was that moment for me where I was like, oh, okay, I actually don't understand the business of television. I didn't understand IP. I didn't understand how copyright works. I didn't understand who owns the program and who doesn't. And so I've always had a fascination with that. And in 2008, I moved to New York, and with, big dreams, I wanted to learn the business of TV. I wanted to make shows in the US. I didn't know a single contact. It was so naive. I was 25. I decided to move to New York, and I was going to make it in America. And honestly, I bought a book on the business of television. I've still got it at home. And I just sat there and read it. I was like, okay, how do all of these things work? And just started absorbing as much literature as I could.
Must be a good book.
It's a good book.
Worked out well
it still
for you.
holds up. It still holds up. And a lot has changed in the media industry since then. So a lot of it doesn't hold up. But it was my first entry point into okay, let's how do I really make TV and not just be a cog in the wheel?
You had a lot of success in Australia. Was it always a dream to move to the US? And how did you let go of the good life that you had there in pursuit of what might have been a greater one on obviously a grander scale with the size of the US market?
That's a good question. And the truth of it is it's partly timing and relationships, right? Like I have an amazing wife who, Michaela, was my girlfriend at the time. And we were considering, I was actually at the time leaning towards moving to London because two of my best friends were moving to London. And it's very common for Australians to do a gap year in London, or a couple of years, I should say, in London. And I'd met with the BBC in London, and they knew about my work in Australia, and there might have been an entry point to go and do a show at the BBC. And I had connections at Channel 4 in the UK and at ITV. And so I was leaning towards I can see how I can make a career in the UK. And my wife, Michaela, who was my girlfriend at the time, she, for whatever reason, loved the idea of going to New York. And I love New York as well. I'd been there before and I absolutely love the city. So we just were stuff it. Let's go to New York City. Let's go against the grain. Yes, our friends are going to London and we love London too, but we just felt like it was more of a challenge and just something totally different. So yeah, we literally picked it on the map and naively decided to move there. And we thought, we'll have a hotel for a couple of nights and we'll find a place. We ended up through a friend of mine from primary school, had some cousins in Long Island, and we ended up living with them for 6 weeks until we get our own place in New York.
Amazing. You mentioned relationships and networking there. Is there a process that you went through to get good at creating and maintaining those relationships once you moved to the US?
I've always been pretty good at networking and relationships, but when I moved, my one goal was I had one contact who knew an agent. And that agent was in LA. The agent was happy to take a meeting with me. And I went in there and I sold myself as here's all the shows that I've worked on in Australia. Here's what I want to do in the US. I want to host, I want to produce, I want to build a company. And for whatever crazy reason, they decided, they believed me and they signed me up. And so this agency signed me up for a 12-month or a 2-year contract. And that allowed me to stay in the US, but also they actually were my sort of conduit to starting to meet people in the industry. And it wasn't that they put me on shows or sold me into shows straight away, but at the time, I got to meet people at HGTV, at Food Network, at CNN, at Travel Channel, at Discovery. And it was, instead of me just, knocking on doors, it was a nice intro, hey, I'd love you to meet Wes Dening. He's just moved to New York. He's an Australian producer and talent, and then I started using those entry points. And I also got to meet production companies that are still around today, who obviously are what I do now. They sell and produce shows to networks, but I got to meet the production community in New York City too.
It's a great reminder that out of all of these amazing shows or different businesses and things that are getting around, there are people out there who make these decisions. So if you can get to the people, I feel like so many people, they're worried about, they're so focused on what can I do to have the best cold approach.
Yep.
But you and I, we're so focused on let's create the relationships that lead to a warm approach where everything else opens up from there.
So true. In the media industry, people are always how do I get an agent? I need to get an agent. And I love agents. Some of my agents are some of my best friends here in the US. people think they'll get an agent and I'm going to sell a show. I'll pitch it to my agent. Agent's going to send it to the network. Oh my God, we're going to make millions of dollars. But the reality is the agent's a very important part of the industry here in the US in film and television and literature as well. But it still comes down to the product. It always does. And the relationship. So like you have to have a great idea. You have to have a great world that you're pitching instead of, it's not just having a contact at an agency that's going to get you that next big show.
When you created WDE, your own production company, how did that feel at the time?
It was great.
Yeah.
Like WDEs, we started in New York City. We also have WDE in Australia. And, it's funny. My friends always give me a hard time because I actually started developing shows that just doing things that I really enjoyed. So the first show that we sold was the Stafford Brothers, and we sold that back to Fox 8. And I was just laughing about it yesterday. Like, thank goodness no one pulled back the curtains on WDE at the time because I was 27 and I sold a 6-part series to Fox 8 in Australia. And thank you very much for taking that leap of faith in me. But like I sold it out of a 1-bedroom apartment in New York City. Like there was no big office and, anything like this. And for whatever reason, they committed and decided they wanted to make the show. And we had a great time slot. There was this after American Idol on Australian TV. And the series followed the life of these 2 DJs, the Stafford Brothers, who traveled around the world. And the quest of the series was they want to be the world's #1 DJ. So they were involved. Their manager was involved. One of Matt's girlfriend, Brooke, was a big part of the cast. So it was very much this ensemble team of 4 following their journey. And then the next series we sold was called The Flying Winemaker with another mutual friend, Eddie McDougall. And that series we sold to Discovery International, and it's now on Netflix. And it was hugely successful, but it was a food and wine show. So we traveled 13 different regions throughout Asia, pairing Asian food with Asian wines. And then, Big Crazy Family Adventure, again, was another amazing travel series. So I sort of lent into things that I thought I would want to make and people would find enjoyable. Yeah.
Shout out Bruce Kirkby. He was on the show on episode 36. What are some of the most thrilling moments you've had going around the world, not just for WD, but maybe for things you've done with Eureka as well? Like, is there anything that stands out? You've been to Everest, you've been to all of these different countries. Anything that's so memorable or that you really just reflect on today as like, wow, that was a cool experience?
Yeah, I have those moments sometimes. I've been really lucky. Mount Everest, 100%. I remember for Big Crazy Family Adventure, for the final part of the journey, we spent about 7 days hiking to this remote monastery in Ladakh in the Indian Himalaya. And we had about 50 donkeys that were carrying all of our production gear. And I remember looking back going, wow, this is something. Like, how often do you have donkeys carrying all of your gear? And that many of them. So definitely that is a journey that was amazing. To be honest, I was just in Athens. We're doing a show for CBS and Network 10 called The Real Love Boat. We're, taking that amazing series from the 70s and 80s, The Love Boat, and we're turning it into a dating series. And just being in Athens again and being back in Europe after a couple of years of not traveling so much was thrilling. And I'm really excited to spend some time in the Mediterranean making that series coming up. Antarctica, absolutely. I mean, I've lost the photos, which I'm really gutted about, but I spent 6 weeks living in Antarctica. I'll never forget one time, because in Antarctica, there really aren't any roads. And we went from the base, a helicopter flew us to this sort of remote area where there was a colony of Adelie penguins. And the helicopter dropped us off and he said, hey, I'm going to be back. Oh, no, he said, we'll be back tomorrow to pick you guys up. And we were just on a big ice sheet and there was rock around as well where the penguins were. And we spent the afternoon filming them. And because it was summer, the sun never really went down. We had our sleeping bags and our bivvy bags and some food. And so once we'd finished shooting the penguins, we then rolled out our swags, got into our sleeping bags. I had a little bit of red wine there, had a little glass of red or two. I just remember looking around. It's like, we're in the middle of Antarctica on our own. Helicopter doesn't come back till tomorrow. Sleeping on the ice. Like, how cool is that?
Surreal.
Like, it is surreal. I'd love to go back and do some of those things. So I've been very, very blessed.
If you're a business owner and want a copy of the 10 biggest mistakes business owners make with their podcast, go to mistakes.wearepodcast.com or click the link in the show notes. It's a free download and will show you everything you need to do to start getting a massive ROI from your podcast so you can help a lot more people, get recognized as the authority in your industry, and scale your business faster than ever. All right, let's get back into the fun.
Because we like to keep it pretty real from a mental health perspective on this show. Were there any really dark days or one particularly dark day that stands out that you have when you had your own production company?
I like to say I'm pretty good on a bad day.
Yeah.
and I've had them for sure. You know, production's tough, and there are always days that are really rough. Things don't go well. Creative isn't quite as you hoped. The client might not be feeling it, which is always tough in my position because for myself, one of my jobs is to oversee creative that's being executed on in the field, but also managing our client to make sure they're really getting what they want. So if the client's not happy, that really weighs heavily on me. I deal with a lot of rejection, so like there are days where we put our heart and soul into an idea that we're developing or selling that might not sell. And that can be really rough because developing a show isn't a couple of days or weeks. It's often months and months of development where you really, really push for something. But look, I've had days where I've been in bubbles in Las Vegas making shows and things don't go well and you're like, oh, it's exhausting. So yeah, there are tough days.
Yeah.
I'm thinking from a mental health perspective, I think the hardest thing with production is working out when everyone's saying, no, this isn't going to work, how you get yourself out of a hole. And we've been in holes before, whether it's a financial hole, a creative hole, or an execution hole. Like they're pretty dark days.
Yeah.
But I tend to find like I'm pretty good at shaking it off the next day.
Yeah. That's great. It's huge having that resilience as you move forward with those different elements. Was there a concept that you had for a show that never got made where you were like, wow, I would just love to do this one day, or just never could find a good home for it? Did anything like that ever happen?
I don't want to tell you.
Yeah, you got to keep it in the chamber just in case.
It might pop up again sometime. Because it's true, I do have that bank of ideas, and there's a couple in my head which I'm not going to say.
You're like Eminem with the scrapbooks of lyrics. It might be a song one day.
But you never know. But because like, in fact, I had dinner with someone last night who pitched me an idea that they've had in their head forever, and I won't say what it is either. But I was like, it could work. It could work. Because my industry is so much about timing. I think like a lot of industries, if the timing's right and the creative's right and the idea's right and the team's right, it could go.
A big part of your work, as you've mentioned already, is that you go into very renowned networks and you pitch them this dream world and get them quite literally to buy into that. What do you do? How do you prepare in terms of making sure you give yourself the best chance of a yes at the end of that pitch?
That's a good point. I always like to say, you want your pitch to be irresistible. But our strategy is we're very targeted with our approach to development and sales. And what I mean by that is, I'm not the sort of person who will develop 1,000 things, pitch them all in the hope that, one or two will stick. People say throw a lot of shit at the wall. I used to say that. I don't love that saying so much, because what I think works best is finding something you truly believe in, giving it the pressure test, and then when you do go into pitch, it's all about preparing the pitch, and it's about the materials, and obviously it's about the creative too. So for us, and for me, if I'm going to pitch something, I really will want to really will think about how I present it. I'll think about the materials that I'll take into the room, and I'll think from a network perspective, why are they going to buy this now? So my point being, I'll rehearse, I'll practice, I'll pressure test. And when I go in to pitch something, I think the materials are always really, really good. And I think our clients know that. Like when we go in to pitch something, it's not a half-baked idea or just a piece of paper or just a one line.
You've built up the runs on the board now.
Yeah, build up the runs on the board. And I say to our team that, it's not that we have to sell every show, but you always want the network to have you back for the next pitch. Because I want them to go, oh, Wes is coming in. Let's hear what he's got. He's always got a good pitch.
Yeah. Also, you mentioned there putting yourself in the network shoes, such a big one. You mentioned pressure tests as well. Can you take us through anything that's involved in that, even more broadly or conceptually, what it looks like to pressure test an idea?
Well, there's a few things in what I do. It's like, if it's an idea, like, can it really be made? Because I get pitched ideas and you're like, well, can you do that? So it's like, okay, can it be made is one. Is it a show that I would make? Yes or no? Like I don't do crime shows. So if I was coming in pitching a crime doc series, people would be like, oh, what? Hey? But it's something like, if it's a big competition show, like, yeah, that's a show that we make. We make Holy Moly. So like, that's a world that makes sense for us. And then by pressure test, I mean, with a lot of our shows, they're built around formats. So it's like, how does the format work? So when I pitch you the idea and they go, great, love it. How does it work? I can concisely walk them through what an episode would look like in a way that makes sense. And they'll go, yeah, that's really smart. So that's what I mean by pressure test.
You're doing some incredible work at Eureka now with the team. What are you most excited about for the future?
Whew. So Eureka is an amazing company founded by Chris Colviner and Paul Franklin, who are two of my dearest friends, but also my bosses, and are amazing, amazing people to work with. Like Chris is, one of the most talented creative execs I've ever met, and Paul is one of the most gifted producers that I've ever worked with, and I've learned a lot from both of them. I'm excited for the future. I mean, we've been around for 7 years with Eureka, and I think it's got a really great future ahead. We've had huge shows on, ABC, on Fox. We've had success. Netflix, HBO Max are great partners of ours. Discovery as well. We're making some really great formats at the moment. We do Farmer Wants a Wife in Australia, which is a really fantastic series. I'm excited about The Real Love Boat coming out on CBS and Network 10. But for me, it's like, how do we keep making big, broad entertainment shows that cut through? Because in the media landscape, yes, there are so many buyers, but it's how do you break through the noise? How do you make a show that people want to come and see at a certain time in the week, if it's on a network, for example, or if it's a show for a streamer, like how do you get it to break through so that people are talking about it in their day-to-day life? So I'm excited to find the next big hit, and I'm excited to build on our IP to make more shows, but also make them better so that Eureka is making shows for a very long time.
How do you determine something global versus something that might be require like a local component?
Yeah. Well, typically like a format will have more chance of being a global product or something that you could replicate in multiple areas. I mean, a good example might be, take Australian Idol. Australian Idol happens in Australia with Australian talent and largely Australian judges, singing competition show, start with, 50 people audition, one winner at the end. So the nice thing about that being a format is you can do that in the US, you can do it in the UK. I mean, the format's probably been replicated in 20 countries, maybe 50 countries around the world. I'd have to check. So that's the idea of something that globally could work in so many territories for local versions. Whereas, another show like, say, Big Crazy Family Adventure is harder to replicate on a global scale because, we don't have a Bruce Kirkby and his family in every country that we can do the exact same trip for. So what I look for is, what are those big global formats that could work in the US or work in Australia or work in the UK? And then we can go, hey, here's the playbook. You can now replicate this in any country in the world because the idea and the format is really strong.
Yeah.
So it's about building that IP and being able to exploit that.
So when you're on a winner, you just let the good times roll.
Yeah.
You spoke at the Day One Mastermind recently. You shared the 3 most important attributes to your success: grit, positivity, and reliability, being that you always deliver. How have those 3 attributes helped shape your career? Grit, positivity, and reliability.
Yeah. Grit is a big one for me. I've always had grit because it's not like I was handed a silver platter by any means. And when I started my exploration into television, I fought for everything, right? My first show, I scrapped away. I believed in it. I didn't make any money. I put every cent that I could get into the production. I was 27 when I sold it. And then I made the show, and then we got season 2 up. And then I sold another show. So it's like, for me, it's always like, I'm the guy that's happy to put in the work. And I'm actually there making our shows too. So grit has been a huge part of my success, or a huge, grit's been a huge, like, sort of, what would I say, like a tool in my toolbox. Because I actually now know how to make shows. It's not like I just know how to pitch shows. Like, I know how to make the things. Like, I've done it day in, day out. And I'm constantly surprised, and I'm always learning stuff, but I really am in the trenches, which is great. What were the other 2 that I said?
Well, grit is such a big one. I often say on this show that the biggest 2 attributes, I believe, are resourcefulness, being that you can acquire whatever you want, and then resilience, to keep going in the face of adversity. And grit and resilience are obviously very tightly interlinked. Positivity, being positive mental attitude, such a big one. And reliability, that track record of continuing to deliver.
That's a big one. Like, positivity is pretty straightforward. Like, I'm a pretty positive guy. I want to succeed. I actually want to see friends succeed. I want to see people around me succeed. And I want to be around successful people as well, and positive people. So that's pretty self-explanatory. And then when it comes to being able to deliver and being reliable, that's a huge part of my industry because, there's that saying, you're only ever as good as your last show.
In the mafia, they say you're only as good as your last envelope.
That's funny. That's
Apparently.
funny. That's funny.
Apparently.
That's funny. How do you know that?
Yeah, we're going to be a few questions about the...
But, I always make every show thinking like, A, I want to get it to a season 2. So I want it to be as successful as possible. But I also want our client to be happy with the product. I want to see it succeed. And I want them to buy another show from me as well. So I've always thought of my career in terms of longevity. And yes, I want to find the next big hit, but I also want them being clients, networks, partners, to continue to want to work with us, and I need to deliver in order for them to do that.
Playing that long game, rising tide lifts all boats.
Yeah.
Huge.
I like that.
A question I like to ask all the guests on this show is, on your best day, what's an affirmation that you would write on a flashcard that you could show yourself on your worst day?
You're fucking good at what you do. Believe in yourself.
I think
Because that's the thing. It's like it sounds a little cocky, I suppose, but like when I've doubted myself or I've been up against it, I actually know that I'm really good at what I do. And I actually am, and this is going to sound really over the top, but like I think I'm one of the best people in the industry at what I do because I know how to make shows. I'm a straight shooter. I'm creative, and I like to inspire the people around me who are also creative most of the time to do the very best that they can. And I think that's a real skill, and it's something I've been working on for 20 years, is making shows.
that confidence in yourself, such a great leadership trait as well.
Yeah.
We had
Because sometimes, I was just going to say, because sometimes you have days where you're like, am I just doing everything wrong? Like, am I an idiot? And I'm not, I don't think I'm an idiot.
Yeah.
But like in times that are tough, it is nice to remind yourself that, you're very good at what you do.
Yeah.
And believe in yourself, and you'll work out a way to get out of the hole.
Dr. Mike Gervais, who's one of the top psychologists for elite performers, he actually mentioned something very similar. He just switched gears the moment I asked him that question. He said something very, very similar. I forget what episode he's on. We'll include a link to that in the show notes, what Dr. Mike Gervais shared. But I think that's brilliant. And you can see the emotion and the sincerity when you say that as well, which I think is really important. Before we move into the Win the Day Rocket Round, I got one question for you. You've got a beautiful family. You've got a wife, 3 kids, and a great career. What would it take to put all that on hold to spend another 100 days in the Big Brother house?
Just tell me when.
Yeah, I was going to say, sometimes as a parent.
Hang on, so I get to go away from my family, away from the kids, and I have 100 days on my own in a house?
Where do I sign?
Sounds great. Yeah. God, it would take a bit. I don't know why I would do that, to be honest.
Yeah.
Apart from just the time off. Or unless someone backed the truck up with cash, and I was like, okay, sure.
Big Brother house, I feel like it's a young person's game.
It is.
It's like bachelor parties.
Only reason I would go in there professionally is like I didn't understand how to play the game.
Yeah.
And having worked in the industry for the last 18 years, there's a strategy to it that I didn't quite understand. So I'd like to do it again in terms of thinking how you could really play the game and win it.
Play it like Game of Thrones.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Let's now move to the Win the Day Rocket Round. 10 questions for some quick answers. You up for this one, Wes?
Let's do it.
Number 1, what quote inspires you the most?
Perfect practice makes perfect performance.
Love it. Number 2, morning coffee or evening wine?
Morning coffee.
Number 3, what's one bit of advice you would give your 18-year-old self?
Enjoy your 20s. 18-year-old self. Let me think about that for 1 second. You know what's funny? When I was 18 and I was in my early 20s, I kind of was fortunate enough that I did a lot of things that I enjoyed. But what's the advice that I'd give? 18-year-old self, my advice is keep traveling, enjoy your 20s. 20s are for learning, 30s are for earning. So enjoy it.
Yeah. Number 4, what book do you gift the most?
Oh, I don't gift books. That's a good idea. I'd like to gift more books.
Or a book you've read recently that you enjoyed? Wes actually gets a big shout out in Blue Sky Kingdom from Bruce Kirkby. So if anyone hasn't read that book, that is a fantastic book. When you hear Wes mentioned, that's this Wes here. It's a great one.
I know. I sent that to all my family for Christmas last year.
I actually sent it to a bunch of people for Christmas.
Did
too.
you?
Yeah,
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I don't read a lot of books, but I read the New York magazine every week, or the New Yorker. So what I do actually love, I can't read the entire thing in a week, but I pick a couple of articles to try and read. And then I'm at the age now where I like sharing the comics with my kids. So they don't quite get the humor, but my kids every week want to read the comics from the New Yorker. So that's what I share.
Nice, good bonding experience. Number 5, was there a vulnerability you once hid within that became your superpower?
Yes, and I'm still working on it, is that I don't have to do and control everything. Learning to let things go so that other people can do their jobs is something that I've struggled with, because I did start my own company. I'm very hands-on. I like things to be done in a certain way, but I'm learning that with great people around you, I can help with creative and tone and direction, but enable people around me to do what they're highly skilled in.
Yeah, let them be great with their skills. That is such a big, letting go of that controlling thing. That's something I really struggle with as well. That's well said. Number 6, what's one thing you've learned about failure?
That you do learn from it. Actually, one thing I've learned from failure is often you rarely fail on your own. You're often failing with a team, or you might be failing for a client, or you're failing because something didn't go the way you planned. I've found that when you're honest and collaborative, that when you do fail, you normally come out of that failure with stronger bonds with your clients and that team than you had going into it. So failures are absolutely part of the journey, and I've had many of them. But when I've come out of them, often I've built stronger relationships from them.
And that transparency and communication that you and I have spoken about offline before is such a good asset that you have as well. Number 7, if you could sit on a park bench and have a conversation with someone alive or dead, who would it be?
I don't know why Elvis came to mind. It's like I'm in my 50s.
I saw an Elvis impersonator at a party on the weekend. I'm not kidding. Out of nowhere, I was in the pool and this Elvis impersonator comes out, starts busting out Elvis's greatest hits for an hour. It was a very American experience.
That's funny. Who would I like to have a conversation with? Oh, yeah, this is going to sound lame, but I'd love to see my pa again. I like my mum's dad was someone who just taught me a lot about being a gentleman, about being a man, and he taught me how to sail, and it was great to have a beer. Like, when I was 16, he'd, pour a beer and I'd have half it, he'd have the other half, and we'd just chat. So I'd love to catch up with him. But famous people, oh God, mate, that's a tough one. You got any ideas?
They don't need to be famous. Yeah, I think that's actually a really good one.
I'd say it'd be my pa then. Yeah,
nice
someone
nice and wholesome. Yeah, someone that means a lot to you.
Well, someone who I don't think I ever took it for granted the time I spent with him. And, he died 20 years ago, but just was really influential on my teenage years in terms of helping to groom me to be a good citizen.
We did an episode recently with my dad, actually, and in a line of that, I mentioned that being around the right people who see the potential in you when you don't see it in yourself, whoever that is, such a big thing.
Yeah, totally.
Number 8, what tool or resource best helps you run your life or your business? iPhone is actually a surprisingly common
That's the first thing I thought of.
Yeah, I think I might have to change that question.
Because I think I'm addicted to my iPhone. Like I'm constantly on it. So I'd say it's definitely my iPhone in terms of day to day. My team helps run my diary and calendar, and it's not because it sounds a little hoity-toity, but it's like in my job, I constantly have to juggle between development, which is developing, selling new shows, and current programming, which is the shows that we're making. So it's like I constantly need to shift gears as to where my focus needs to be and putting it in the right place. Because with creative industries, like when I'm in 100% and I'm deep, I can get a lot done. But when you are juggling several projects throughout a day, without planning your day well in your calendar, it's hard to fully engage.
Yeah, your energy spread a bit thin.
So I'd say it's my iPhone, and then it's also my calendar.
Yeah. Number 9, share one thing on your bucket list. I mean, by the time you've already ticked Antarctica off, it's hard to... Antarctica and Everest, mind you. Yeah, you've already got a couple of them done.
I've always wanted to swim the English Channel. Yeah. So that's a big, hairy, audacious dream.
And he could actually do it too. I couldn't. Wes could. Wes is a very good swimmer.
Yeah. And as you know, I do ocean water swimming here in Santa Monica, and I absolutely love it. And I've been doing it for years. We swim, 2 miles in the pool. I'll do 3 miles with a session. But, I think the English Channel is something like 23 or 33 Ks. It's a long swim. But I when I was in my 20s, I said, by the time I'm 40, I want to swim the English Channel. And now that I'm just about there, by the time I'm 60, I want to swim the English Channel. So that's.
Do they do it in a cage, or do they just do it out in the
no cage,
no sharks there, no jellyfish,
cage, no wetsuit? You butter yourself up with some sort of stuff, and then it's an overnight swim. They normally start like in the early mornings, like 1 or 2 a.m. And you leave from the coast of the UK over to France.
Amazing.
I'd like to do that.
Yeah, get a Kronenberg as soon as you get to France.
Exactly. Yeah.
And final question, number 10. What's one thing you do to win the day? Your morning swim?
It's my morning routine. Yeah. Like I come in so charged to start my day. I've always been a morning person, but starting with a good swim or a bit of exercise. I like Wes time before I start anything. I don't get on my phone or on my emails as soon as I wake up. I try and have that bit of time in my day to do something active. And I find that when I do that, I'm at my best.
Yeah. Clears your head.
Yeah. Like I'll come into the office bouncing, ready to win. And I love win the day because, every day is a battle and you do want to come out of it having a few wins. And I know that when I start my day like that and I come into the office and I see our team, like I'm ready to go.
Yeah. Well, make sure you connect with Wes on LinkedIn at Wes Dening and on Twitter at Wes Dening. All that and more will be linked in the show notes. Always great to see you, mate. Thanks for coming on the Win the Day show.
Thank you, buddy. I really appreciate it. Have me back.
I hope you enjoyed that interview. As you heard, our guests love to hear positive feedback no matter where they're at in their careers. So share a comment on the YouTube version of this episode with your favorite takeaway so our guests know they made a difference in your life today. If you're a business owner and want a copy of the 10 biggest mistakes business owners make with their podcast, go to mistakes.wearepodcast.com or click the link in the show notes. It's a free download and will show you everything you need to do to start getting a massive ROI from your podcast so you can help a lot more people, get recognized as the authority in your industry, and scale your business faster than ever. And if you haven't already, hit the subscribe or follow button so you can get access to episodes like this one as soon as they are released. The Win the Day podcast is available on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, and wherever you listen to podcasts. Finally, the right bit of inspiration can completely change the trajectory of someone's life. So if there's a friend or loved one out there who needs to hear this episode or could use some help to win the day, share it with them right now. That's all for this episode. Get out there and win the day. Until next time, onwards and upwards, always.